Adams Archive.
Hello, you beautiful people, and welcome to the Adams Archive. My name is Austin Adams, and thank you so much for listening today. On today's episode, we're going to be touching on a single document. Well, a single document and the page of another document. And the reason that we're going to talk about this is because I found this highly concerning, and it took me down this rabbit hole, and I think that it's something that you should be aware of. The document that I'm discussing here is the Homeland Security's Homeland Threat Assessment of 2025. Now, this was just released in October, I believe October 4th, just a couple weeks ago, not even. And the reason that I think this is important is this is actually the replacement document of what was formerly the National Terrorist Advisory Bulletin. If you recall in the past, if you've been listening for a while, you'll know that I've read the National Terrorist Advisory Bulletin several times because what it does is it gives you insight into what they are utilizing as a Trojan horse to surveil American citizens under the guise of homegrown violent extremists. It will tell you the topics that they're looking at for you to be speaking out about, for you to end up in a situation where they can be surveilling you, amongst many other things. And then the second document that I'm talking about is from the Department of Defense. And this is the DOD Directive 5240.01. And that document, let's see if we got a title for you. The DOD Intelligence and Intelligence-Related Activities and Defense Intelligence Component Assistance to Law Enforcement Agencies and Other Civil Authorities. And this will talk about how it relates to the American military being able to be weaponized against American citizens. Now, you can go look up all of these documents. The DOD Directive 5240.01 came out September 27th of 2024. And the Homeland Threat Assessment came out on October 4th of 2024. And this is for 2025. So I've gone through, I've annotated this document. We're going to be doing a deep dive into it today, talking about the implications of this, my thoughts on it, what this could mean over the coming months and year. And some of it's quite concerning. So that is what our discussion is about today. But first, I need you to, you know the deal, subscribe, leave a 5-star review. I would appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. You know, I don't like, I've been played out by this whole election cycle. Like I have election fatigue. So maybe we'll get into that in the beginning. So it's been hard for me to get on here every single day and talk about the current events because it seems like every current event that's out there right now is related to the election. And it's been frustrating. So I'm here. Let's talk about some real stuff that really matters, you guys. Not that the election doesn't matter, but, you know, Donald Trump going to McDonald's and Kamala Harris sounding drunk. It's just a little too reality showy for me. Anyways, here it is. Let's go ahead and jump into it. But first, subscribe, leave a 5-star review, head over to my company's website, RoninBasics.com. Ronin Basics is a company that offers Faraday goods, which protects you from the threats of modern technology. Whether it's EMFs being emitted by your cell phone, your Wi-Fi router, your microwave, 5G towers, all of those things, you can get a hat to protect yourself. Or if you're looking to protect your privacy or your attention span, you can get one of our new products that is in today, the Faraday phone sleeves. And it will block all inbound and outbound signals for you. Stop those damn companies from tracking you along with the government. Eliminate those EMFs. Go check it out, RoninBasics.com, and let's jump into it.
The Adams Archive.
All right. So like I was saying before, the election cycle to me has just been very frustrating. It's played out. There's been so many, it just seems like a reality show. There's so many advertisements going everywhere. There's a door hanger on your door every single day. There's people knocking on my door at all times of the night, trying to convince me to vote for this person or that person. And guess what? No, but I don't see anybody changing their vote over Kamala's ad. I don't see them changing their vote over Trump's door hanger. Although I think those are probably a little bit more tactful and helpful than any of the other tactics because you can actually get more information into those. But it's been so overwhelming and so annoying at this point that it's been hard for me to jump on here and talk about the election. Now, it is a very, very important election. I implore you to go out and vote. This is a serious, serious election cycle. This will determine what our country looks like over the next 4, 10, 20, and 30 years. So go vote. You know who the right candidate is. I'm not going to tell you. You don't need anybody else telling you who to vote for. But I think we know what's right for our country and what's wrong for our country. Anyways, that gets into this directive that I'm talking about here. So there was some documents surfacing online about the DOD, Department of Defense directives to be able to intervene in civilian unrest in a very specific and concerning way with the use of lethal force. Now, that drove me to want to look at the Department of Homeland Security's National Advisory Bulletin, because that will tell you who they're setting their sights on, who they're monitoring right now domestically to see if they can weaponize the military against them. So the document that we're going to look at first, well, maybe we'll go right to the lethality document. Let me go ahead and show you this. DOD Directive 5240. Now, this document is released by the Department of Defense on September 27th, 2024. Now, that is important when you're talking about these things because sometimes they lapse, sometimes they aren't current, and they aren't something that we need to discuss. But this one was released just a couple weeks ago. And it says the purpose of this is to implement executive orders 12333, 13388 in Title 50 United States Code, establishes policy and provides direction for DOD intelligence and intelligence-related activities, and assigns responsibility and provides guidelines for defense, intelligence, component intelligence assistance to law enforcement agencies and civil authorities. So that's what we're going to focus on today, is assigns responsibilities and provides guidelines for defense, intelligence, component intelligence assistance to law enforcement agencies and other civil authorities. So we have to think of this in two parts. One part is the surveillance side of things. How are they going to be surveilling the American public? What gives them the ability to enact this surveillance, right? So when you go back all the way to 2002, right, the Patriot Act being passed, all of this, the craziness going on with 9/11, the Patriot Act gets passed. And the Patriot Act essentially says there is domestic violent extremists, and if we believe anybody to be a terrorist, we have unlimited power without having to go through Congress or the Senate or the President of the United States to surveil people without cause. And we do not have to expose who we're surveilling. So when you understand the power of the Patriot Act, you need to look at, okay, who are they going to be concerned, quote unquote, about and weaponize this type of technology against? So let's go down to 3.3 and look at this part of the directive, which is the most concerning to me, which is under section 3, which is defense intelligence component assistance to law enforcement agencies and other civil authorities. All right, so then you go under 3.3. Now, under 3.3, it says levels of authority. Subject to paragraph 3.1, defense intelligence components may provide personnel. So the government, the military, the Department of Defense can provide personnel, provide soldiers to assist a federal department or agency, including a federal law enforcement agency or a state or local law enforcement agency. Just your local police can now use military assets when lives are in danger in response to a request for such assistance in accordance with the following approval authorities. So the military can now, well, let's hold that thought and let's read. I don't want to frame this for you yet. The Secretary of Defense may approve any type of requested permissible assistance as described in 3.2. The decision to approve requests for these types of permissible assistance described in 3.2 to law enforcement agencies and other civil authorities are reserved for the Secretary of Defense. Now, when we go down to 3.2 or 3.3a C, which says they may provide assistance in responding with assets with potential for lethality, or any situation in which it is reasonably foreseeable that providing the requested assistance may involve the use of force that is likely to result in lethal force, including death or serious bodily injury. It also includes all support to civilian law enforcement officials in situations where a confrontation between civilian law enforcement and civilian individuals or groups is reasonably anticipated. So, if there's any foreseeable, right, you have to pay attention to the legal language of this, because the reason they're writing this is not to inform you. The reason that they're writing this is so that they have a legal standing when something goes down. When civilians and law enforcement clash, they can now call in the military, and they are now authorized to use lethal force against civilians. That's what this document says. They were not able to do that before. They could not enact the government, the military, to come in and use lethal force during civil unrest periods by military officials. They weren't able to do that. Now they are. So let's read that one more time, a little bit slower, and look at the language that's used. Assistance, right? So you can provide, Secretary of Defense approval can provide assistance in responding with assets with potential for lethality. Okay? Or any situation in which is reasonably foreseeable. So any situation which it's reasonably foreseeable. Well, who gets to decide what's reasonable? Who gets to decide what's foreseeable? That's a good question. Bureaucrats, right? Whoever's getting called by their buddy in law enforcement, or whoever's getting called by their mayor that funded, that had their campaign funded by BlackRock, or BlackRock comes in and says, hey, we know there's going to be a riot today in downtown New York. Call in the army, put them there, just station them around, right? And so we'll get into what some darker sides of that are in just a second, but let's finish this out. Assistance in responding, the Secretary of Defense can give DOD support, military assets, in responding with potential for lethality. So they can use lethal force, or any situation which is reasonably foreseeable. Any situation reasonably foreseeable that providing the requested assistance may involve the use of force that is likely to result in lethal force. So they're saying that if there is any use of force by law enforcement and it is reasonably foreseeable that there could be a death as a result, they can now send in the military. It also includes all support to civilian law enforcement officials in situations where a confrontation between civilian law enforcement and civilian individuals or groups is reasonably anticipated. Reasonably anticipated. Not happens, right? No, they can do this reasonably anticipated. They can do it ahead of time. If they say, oh, there's going to be civil unrest during the election, they can then set up army units that are authorized to use lethal force around voting locations. Authorized to use lethal force on civilians in our own country. The military, that was everybody joins the military to fight foreign entities, right? To fight foreign enemies. And now they're going to use that same military if there's a reasonably foreseeable reason that they should. Reasonably foreseeable. The language matters here, guys. Such use of force must be in accordance with DOD 5210.56, potentially as further restricted based on the specifics of the requested support. So maybe we should pull that up. I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but this stuff matters, guys. This is important. Arming and the use of force by the DOD. Let's see how long this is. Not too long. It's 26 pages. So let's see if we can find real quickly where we should pay attention here. All right, so if we go down to 3.4E in this document, it talks about the use of deadly force. And it's essentially what you would expect. If there's an imminent danger, or if he or she is not very moment, pointing a weapon at a person, for example. So even if you're not pointing a weapon at them, he or she has a weapon within reach, or is running for cover carrying a weapon, they can shoot you. Civilians. So if you're, I don't know, open carrying, and they think that you pose any type of threat, they can just shoot you. Civilians, the military, during civil unrest, right? DOD recognizes and respects paramount value of all human life. If less than valuable or less than deadly force can be reasonably expected to accomplish the same result without reasonably increasing the danger to armed DOD personnel. Deadly force is justified when there is a reasonable belief that the subject of such force poses an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm to a person, or under the circumstances described under 3.4E. So essentially what it's saying is, any and all circumstances, if you have a weapon, if you're open carrying, which you have the right to do, or even if you're concealed carrying, and somehow they know that you're holding that weapon or have that weapon in the vicinity of you, they could shoot you if they think that you pose any type of threat. You know, the laws that were designed to be weaponized against our enemies is now being weaponized against us. So if we go to the document that I'm talking about now, right? So we have those two DOD directives. We understand that. But this is also something I want to point and draw your attention to, and this is the last thing of this document, then we'll move to the actual National Terrorist Advisory document, which is the USD and INS approval. So it says, so this is how they actually get the soldiers. This is the approval process. If the requested personnel exceeds 20 people, then you have to ask for approval. But if it's less than 20 armed military soldiers authorized to use deadly force, you don't. You don't. Within the United States of America. Or if the duration of the requested assistance exceeds 30 days. So you don't even need approval. If you get 20 soldiers for 29 days, you don't even need DOD approval. You don't need to have the Secretary of Defense approve the request. You can just go right around them. Go to the military. They'll send you 20 soldiers for 29 days. And then you can request it again for another 29 days that are authorized to use lethal force on civilians. Now, let's see who they're concerned about, because that's what the next document talks about, or concerned about, but who they're going to start to say poses a risk, right? Now, this document isn't just about that. This talks about foreign enemies as well, and some election interference from Russia and China and what these people are trying to. This isn't just about American citizens, but a large portion of it is. A large portion of it is. All right. Let me go ahead and switch this here so you guys can watch what I'm looking at. Not that. All right, so here we go. Here's your document. Now, if you're on YouTube, you can follow along and actually look at this with us. Let's make that a little bit bigger for you. Okay, here we go. Here is the document. Office of Intelligence and Analysis, Homeland Threat Assessment, Homeland Security, 2025. All right. So here is your table of contents. Talks about the border. There's the executive summary. But let's go down and look at some of the stuff that I have outlined here. Now, if you want this document, I'll send it to you. Head over to my Instagram. I'll be posting some videos of this, and there'll be a keyword that you can comment that I'll send you both of these. You can also just look up the name of the document on Google and find it yourself, but yeah. All right, so it says public safety and security. All right, this is page 1. It says over the next year, domestic and foreign violent extremists, the harmful effects of illegal drugs in adversarial states seek to exacerbate our divisions, as well as silence criticism for diaspora communities will pose a threat to public safety and security on the homeland. Specifically, we expect the threat environment in the United States over the next year will remain high due to a confluence of factors. These factors include violent extremist responses to domestic socio-political developments and the 2024 election cycle. Concurrently, adversarial states are intent on sowing distrust in our institutions, as well as confusion and division in our communities through their malign influence campaigns, with some actors seeking to boost these efforts during the 2024 election cycle. These state actors will violate our rule of law and undermine freedom of speech in their efforts to suppress dissidents living in the United States. So what the conversation is that they're having there is like, oh, it's these violent extremists, it's these foreign adversaries, it's these terrorists out there, and over here, terrorists that are sowing distrust in our institutions. No. You know what's sowing distrust in our institutions? The lying that's happened over the last 4 years. You know what's sowing distrust in our institutions? The continued corruption and the continued crossover between corporatism and politics. You know what's sowing distrust in our system? How almost every single one of the high-level people in our government right now are going to find themselves a high-level executive position at the organizations that funded them, whether they're foreign or domestic, to use their terms. Right? Their son's going to be on the Chinese energy board or Ukrainian oil board. Oh yeah, look at Biden and Pelosi and all of these individuals who are powerful people in our government who have their children on the boards of foreign companies that are state-run companies by our adversaries. Maybe that's what's sowing distrust in the institutions. Maybe it's your lack of response to the terrible situations that had happened in Lahaina or in North Carolina or in Florida. Maybe it's your lack of care surrounding the inflation that's happening. Maybe it's one of those things. Maybe that's what's sowing distrust, is that you're distrustful. Not the fact that foreign and domestic violent extremists have thoughts on political ideologies. So there's that summary. Let's move on. So it says that, and actually we should probably go to the bottom here, because one thing that I found to be unique in this document is that in the National Terrorist Advisory Bulletins, they used to say the full words. What you'll find in this document is they use all of these acronyms to try and make it so that you can't screenshot this and post it without context. So what you'll see is there's these DVE, the HVEs, the FTOs, all of these specific acronyms. So I'm going to show you first what those acronyms mean, and then we'll go back to the portion that I just had up there for you. And here they are. Okay, definitions and contextual notes. An FTO is a foreign terrorist terrorist organization. So FTO, foreign terrorist. DVE, domestic violent extremist. Okay, so let's look at the definition of that, which it says is an individual. So a domestic violent extremist, a DVE, is an individual based and operating primarily within the United States or its territories without direction or inspiration from a foreign domestic or a foreign terrorist group or other foreign power who seeks to further political or social goals wholly or in part through unlawful acts. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. It's early in the morning. Unlawful acts of force or violence. The mere advocacy of political and social positions, political activism, or use of strong language and rhetoric or generalized philosophic embrace of violent tactics alone does not constitute violent extremism and may be constitutionally protected. Maybe, you think that the advocacy of political and social positions or political activism or use of strong rhetoric, yeah, that is absolutely protected under the Constitution. may be constitutionally protected. DVEs can fit within one or multiple categories of ideological motivation and can span a broad range of groups or movements. INA utilizes this term synonymously with domestic terrorist. So the mere advocacy may be constitutionally protected, but we're still going to label you as a violent extremist. And they may still use the word domestic terrorist. So this is important when we go back and we look at the conversations that we're having. Now, when we look at HVE, the HVE is homegrown violent extremist, is a person of any citizenship who has lived or operated primarily in the United States or its territories, who advocates, is engaged in, or is preparing to engage in ideologically motivated terrorist activities, including providing support to terrorism in furtherance of political or social objectives promoted by a foreign terrorist organization, but is acting independently of direction by a foreign terrorist organization. HVEs are distinct from traditional domestic terrorists who engage in unlawful acts of violence to intimidate civilian populations or attempt to influence domestic policy without direction or influence from a foreign actor. Okay, so they're saying these people have opinions, right? They haven't, the word violence is not in any of these things. Like there's who engage in unlawful acts of violence to intimidate civilian populations. Okay, so there's one mention of violence. Throughout that entire definition, you do not have to be violent. You do not have to be extremist. You have to hold an ideology that they don't like, which may be constitutionally protected, to fall into one of these two categories. Now, it also defines conspiracy theorist or a conspiracy theory. So Homeland Security defines a conspiracy theory, which is defined as a subset of narratives in which the ultimate cause of an event is believed to be due to a malevolent plot by multiple actors working together or as an effort to explain some event or practice by reference to the machinations of powerful people who attempt to conceal their role, or at least until their aims are accomplished, as per the National Counterterrorism Innovation, Technology and Education Center, a DHS Center of Excellence. DHS does not hold a position on the veracity of the claims associated with these theories. So what they're saying is, if you believe there's any number of group of people who is trying to conceal their identity that has worked together to cause an event, that is a conspiracy theory. And we can write you off, and we can put you into a document where we can now put you on a list. Crazy. This is their definition of a conspiracy theory. So if you hold the belief that any number of people, 3, 4, 5 powerful people, did anything to cause an event and then tried to conceal their position during that event, which has happened always, forever, in history, in every event, then you are now considered a conspiracy theorist. And now that becomes important, right? This isn't just conspiracy theory in your bio, right? This is important because then they can utilize this document and say, here's how we're going to weaponize the Department of Justice against you. So now that we have that background, let's go back up to the document. All right, so terrorism. So it says that so there's some foreign stuff, there's some domestic stuff. I'm just going to walk you through line by line in the document. Some of the foreign stuff. It says foreign terrorist organization inspired homegrown violent extremists. So inspired by terrorists, but homegrown will remain high, right? So homegrown violent extremists remain high. The threat will continue to be characterized primarily by lone offenders or small cells motivated to violence by a combination of racial, religious, gender, or anti-government grievances, conspiracy theorists, and personalized factors. We are particularly concerned about the likelihood of violent motivation by developing domestic and global events, including the 2024 election cycle and the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict. So what you have to notice there is when they say conspiracy theorists And then they say the election cycle, right? If you say anything about the election not being fair, not being right, not being accurate, you can now be labeled a homegrown violent extremist because that can be tied to some bigger plot, even if you have no violent actions. Because what you have to understand about this document and why this document's important is because what they're essentially establishing is the ground rules for their organization. The ground rules for if you say this, right? If you say this thing, if you say this, we think you're going to this. So we're going to do this, right? That if you think or say this, we think that you're going to do this. And so we can do all of this to stop you, even though you didn't do any of it yet. Preemptively or reasonable belief, right? Words are important. So when you understand that they can use anything within their power, if they can label you as this DVE or HVE, the domestic violent extremist or homegrown violent extremist. The second that you say anything about one of these things, right? Global events like the election cycle, right? Talking about things like conspiracy theorists where people plot to do bad things like they always have. Gender ideology, racial, political, right? I like how they include gender in there. Like, oh, okay, let's use the Department of Justice and lethal force to protect the trans people because their sexual kinks want them to dress up. All right. Moving on, a number of violent extremists embrace multiple, sometimes competing motivations, challenging our ability to identify their potential targets in advance because their pre-attack statements online are often unrelated or only loosely related to the targets they ultimately choose. So what they're saying there is, if you say anything about anything that we don't like, we can then correlate it back to this entire list of things and say that, oh, because you say you don't agree with women in men's sports, you're now going to enact a terrorist attack on Jewish populations, right? So if this, then this, so we can this, right? If you say something about gender ideology, we believe that you fall into this potential category to do some Jewish violent attack on Jewish groups. So we can then do all of this in between to surveil you. It says between September 23 and September 24 or July 2024, DVEs driven by anti-government, racial, or gender-related motivations have conducted at least 4 attacks in the homeland, one of which resulted in a death. Like, do you know how much government overreach we're getting for one death here? Between September and July. One death. And they're going to weaponize the Department of Defense. U.S. law enforcement at least disrupted 7 additional DVE plots, 2 HVE plots. And again, I'm not saying that this stuff doesn't happen. I'm not saying that they shouldn't exist. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be able to maybe not even surveil people domestically, right? That wasn't what was supposed to be allowed until the Patriot Act. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be able to do their job, though. And their job is to figure out where is a terrorist attack going to come from. And there has been domestic terrorist attacks. Most of the domestic terrorist attacks have been against Donald Trump, not against literally any other government official. So unless they're speaking about, oh, if, you know, I highly doubt they're using this to surveil liberals with blue hair at, you know, some furry event. No, it's being weaponized against the right. But again, they have to be able to do their job. I'm sure there are, you know, there's been like the Boston bombing and there's been other historical events that I would love for these people to stop. And nothing against these people if they're surveilling me right now for talking about furries. But like, I know you got to do your job. I know people who have been in positions in these organizations, and I appreciate what you do. But when it's weaponized against the American people for nothing other than posting a political opinion online so that you can utilize these overreaching government tools to then surveil their private life, that is not constitutional, right? The Patriot Act is not constitutional. And now this type of document allows you to overreach beyond what should be allowed for a complete Orwellian state of government. So if you say anything about this category of things, a list of probably 100 words that they have in the Department of Defense and Homeland Security, if you say any word like this, it triggers AI to pick up your profile, and now they have you on a list somewhere, and now they can use the Patriot Act to listen into your phone microphone and use AI to scrape your conversations and search your conversations for any of the jokes that you make with your wife in private. It shouldn't be allowed. Right? You should still be able to do your job. And I think you can still do your job by monitoring it with a sniper rifle and not an RPG, right? Or a nuke, essentially, right? You don't need to monitor millions and millions and millions of Americans to find the one that's sitting there posting online talking about how they want to enact some violent act on a school or shoot up some mosque, right? Like, you don't need all of that. You don't need that power to do that. Now, let's look at some other portions here. As we move down this document. The next portion I'd like to point out is biological. So this is just interesting to me. Over the last year, foreign and domestic extremists online expressed interest in using DNA modification. So I've heard this one several times recently. This is a very recent event. And this is something that I've talked about before. When you've used 23andMe, you are giving your DNA to an entity that will then sell that data to foreign and domestic governments or companies like BlackRock, right? Now, what they can do with that DNA, the technology has been devised. Iran has tried this. China has tried this. There's evidence. There's been, I was listening to a senator yesterday talk about on the Sean Ryan podcast how China has been trying to develop a biological weapon that only attacks childbearing age individuals. So here's another example of that in this document where it says, we expect threat actors to continue to explore emerging and advanced technologies to aid their efforts in developing and carrying out chemical and biological attacks. Over the last year, this document says, foreign and domestic extremists online expressed interest in using DNA modification to develop biological weapons to target specific groups. So if you want women between the age of this and this, if you want certain ethnic minorities, if you want certain or majorities, you want a certain gender, you want a certain age group, you want a certain background, whatever it is, you can splice DNA down and see, hey, I want this new COVID, quote unquote, but much more deadly, to attack men who are fighting age between the ages of 18 and 45. Decimate the men between 15 to 45. They can do that. And that's what this document's outlining here. So when you're giving your DNA to these organizations, they can even target it down to the individual, right? They could release some massive flu virus and they want to target 15 DNA strands and have it be lethal against 100 people, 150 people. They can manipulate that virus to do that. It also says we also remain concerned about the potential for threat actors to use unmanned aircraft systems in chemical and biological attacks due to the continued advancement of UAS technology and the growing availability of UAS. So it's saying that people are going to use drones to drop these types of things. All right, now it moves into influence operations and transnational repression. All right, so Russia will likely continue to use traditional state-sponsored media. For example, over the past year, Russian influence actors have amplified stories regarding U.S. migration flows to stoke discord in the United States. Like, no, that wasn't Russia. That was you. Like, maybe this should be talking about how the Harris and Biden campaign let in 22 million illegals. Maybe we should be talking about that being the reason that these stories are amplified, not Russia. We should be having that conversation. You shouldn't be mad at the messenger, right? Even if they're amplifying those conversations, be like, hey, look at how ridiculous the United States is for letting in all of these terrorists. We're not going to do that. It's just funny that to me that they want to point out these foreign countries acting like, oh, we didn't do anything wrong. It's because they said it. They're mad. They're just trying to make you mad at us. It's like playing the your parents are divorced. Right? Your parents are divorced and one parent's like, hey, like mom won't let me, I don't know where I'm going with that, but you see the point. You get the idea. It's not Russia's fault that you let in 22 million illegals. It's your fault. And they just pointed it out. So maybe just don't do that. Right? It also says over the last year, Iranian information operations have focused on weakening U.S. public support of Israel. And Israel's response. So Iranian information operations have focused on weakening U.S. public support of Israel and Israel's response to October 7th, 2023 Hamas attacks. These efforts have included leveraging ongoing protests regarding the conflict, posing as online activists, and encouraging protests. Prior to the 2020 U.S. presidential election, Iran attempted to amplify divisive narratives to incite violence, influence the U.S. electorate, and degrade trust in electoral processes. And yeah, for sure, they're probably doing that. And so is Israel. Right? Go check out AIPAC. Maybe we should be talking about AIPAC in here and their influence on domestic senators and congressmen and presidents, dare I say. Another one that I found to be interesting here was that they talk about the People's Republic of China and their disinformation campaigns. And it says that they seek to exploit U.S. disasters. So the U.S. Homeland Security is saying that China's the reason. China is exploiting U.S. disasters, just as it did when it blamed Hawaii wildfires on U.S. military activity, and may also reduce trust in the U.S. institutions and officials, and dissuade survivors to pursue legal federal recovery response and support. Yeah, I don't think that it was just China pointing out that direct energy weapons are real and could have been the result of, or could have resulted in Lahaina. I don't think it's just China pointing out that we have weather modification, that there's literal patents on Google that you can search on all of this technology. Again, stop trying to blame the foreign entity for something that is very real and a possibility. It also says the Department of Justice indicted 7 Chinese-based Chinese nationals for their involvement in a PRC-backed criminal hacking group targeting U.S.-based critics, businesses, and political officials in malicious cyber operations intended to intimidate and silence dissidents and steal from their businesses. All right. Moving on. Okay, so this is probably the most interesting part of this here. And this talks about threat actors likely to focus on the election cycle. Right? This is all about the election. Now, some of the most interesting parts of this I'll read through for you that I highlighted. Again, if you want this document as I highlighted it and all of my annotations, you can just head over to my Instagram once this is posted. You'll be able to request it from my comment section. All right, so one of the first things here is that, let's just read it from the top so we can get into this part of the paragraph. Our electoral processes are an attractive target for threat actors, and we expect many will seek to influence the 2024 election cycle, while some others may seek to access or interfere with election systems, while law enforcement is still investigating their motives behind the apparent assassination attempts on a former U.S. president. These incidents highlight the magnitude of the threat surrounding the election cycle. Okay. Now, here we go. Some domestic violent extremists, particularly those motivated by anti-government or partisan issues, will likely view a wide range of targets, indirectly and directly associated with elections, as viable targets for violence with the intent of instilling fear among voters, candidates, and election workers. What would be the means to that? What would be the end there? Why would they do that? Why, if you're an anti-government or partisan, if you're motivated by partisan issues, well, that's the more important one, right? Anti-government or partisan issues, right? If you're anti-government, we can now say that, oh, you're probably going to attack polling areas, right? You're probably going to go to the local polling area and bomb them or whatever, right? You're probably going to do that if you're anti-government. No, I think you're just bad at your job, and that federalism is generally not helpful, and all it's done is caused a bloated taxation system and leached from American citizens and given all of our money to foreign entities to fight wars that we shouldn't be in. That's why I'm anti-government, and I'm not going to attack anybody as a result. But just because I state that opinion, they can now put me on a list to then say that, oh, I'm going to go attack a polling area. So stupid. Some DVEs, particularly those motivated by anti-government or partisan issues, will likely view a wide, okay, we just said that, instilling fear among voters, candidates, and election workers, as well as disrupting election processes leading up to or after the November election. So leading up to and after, we're not putting any end to this, right? There's no cycle here. We're maybe for the next 3 to 4 months, we should be highly focusing on people who say that the government's bad at their job or doesn't have the right motivations. Nope, just or after. Foreign state-affiliated cyber actors and cyber criminals almost certainly. So this is what I found really interesting too, because they point out the fact that people are going to try to, like, state-affiliated cyber actors and cyber criminals are most likely going to try to change votes using technology and hack into the voting systems and change votes. But then they say something which I find to be hilarious here too. So foreign state-affiliated cyber actors and cyber criminals almost certainly will view network infrastructure that supports U.S. elections as attractive targets. However, there is no reporting to suggest that foreign adversary targets of such systems have ever prevented any eligible voter from casting a ballot, compromised the integrity of any ballots cast, or disrupted the ability to tabulate votes or transmit election results in a timely manner. Right? So they're definitely going to target these polling stations. They're definitely going to try to hack in and change votes. But there's no evidence ever that that's ever occurred, ever, to anyone ever. We promise. Right? So what they're stating there is, like, again, laying the groundwork. They're saying that almost certainly will target the network infrastructure that supports elections to try and change votes. But then they follow that up with, there was no reporting, however, to suggest that foreign adversary targeting of such systems has ever prevented any eligible voter ever from casting a ballot or compromise the integrity of the... Because if they say, this has happened, we know it's happened, they've changed votes, we know they've changed votes, then what? Right? Like, then what? Then we know the election system is compromised, and they can't say that. But what they can say is that we know for certain they're going to target this and try to hack into it and try to change votes. But there's no evidence ever that it's ever happened ever, right? But almost certainly they're going to try to do it. Found that one to be interesting. All right, moving on. It says, in particular, anti-government and anti-authority DVEs, many of whom likely will be inspired by partisan policy grievances or conspiracy theories, will pose the most significant threat. So this is under the guise. So it says, we expect the DVEs to pose the most significant threat to government officials, voters, elections-related personnel and infrastructure, including polling places, ballot drop box locations, voter registration sites, campaign events, political party offices, and vote counting sites. In particular, anti-government. Like, if you're anti-government, you're not trying to stop people from voting. You're not trying to blow up a drop box for vote, for votes. You're not. You're just not participating. I'm not playing this game. The game's stupid. It's all rigged, right? But again, they have to throw that in there. So if you believe that people conspire, right, conspiracy theories, or you believe that the government's not good at what they do and is maybe too large, any one of those things, you pose the most significant threat. We have also recently observed a rise in disruptive tactics targeting election officials like those observed in past election cycles, including hoax bomb threats, swatting, doxing, and mailing white powder letters intended to instill fear. Like, I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm sure that does happen. I'm sure there's some pieces of shit that will try to, intimidate voters not to vote. Whatever. But the fact that they're calling out anybody who believes that a small or large group will conspire and conceal their identity to do something that you wouldn't want them to do as the American public, now you're a conspiracy theorist. And if you believe the government is bad at what they do, if you've heard my bowling alley story when I was in the military, they are generally bad at what they do. And I've heard this too. Do you know who's not bad at what they do? The intelligence agencies. They're the ones who hire the Harvard graduates and Oxford alumni and MIT this and all of those they come off as very stupid when they put out those Secret Service agents that looked like they did when Trump was there. But that was on purpose, right? The people that are actually in the Department of Defense at the highest levels of these three-letter agencies, they're not unintelligent. They're not ignorant. They're not stupid, right? But most of the government is. Right? It's not all the DMV, but a lot of it's the DMV. Online users and forums frequented by some DVEs have increasingly called for violence linked to the 2024 election cycle and seek to promote violence in response to politically and socially disruptive topics like immigration, abortion rights, and LGBTQIA issues or significant current events. Let's talk about that one. All right, so now we know what the topics are, right? What are the topics of these divisive social issues? Well, immigration. So if you disagree with the fact that Well, maybe we shouldn't have 22 million illegal immigrants coming here, taking jobs, taking over housing units, taking over apartment buildings in Colorado. Oh, okay. Then you must be a part of this violent extremists, right? Domestic violent extremists. Okay. Well, if you disagree with abortion rights, how is that on this document? How does disagreeing with abortion rights have anything to do with domestic violence extremism, to the point where the Homeland Security should be able to put you on a list and the DOD should be able to weaponize lethal use of force through our military against you? How is that a possibility? There's maybe a long, tiny string of correlation between immigration. And not even. How is that an issue? Abortion rights? Like, if you don't want an unborn child to be killed in the mother's womb, if you want more human life, you now are a domestic violent extremist. How is that on this list? Like, there's some stuff that's crazy on here, but that's one of the craziest. We expect domestic violence extremists will continue to rely on these issues to justify violence, this says, and promote their causes in the coming year. This is not calling out domestic violent extremists. This is calling out conservatives and authorizing the use of surveillance, the Patriot Act, lethal use of force through that 5210 document that we just looked at on the Department of Defense's website. How is abortion on there? If you hold any Christian beliefs and you believe that a child shouldn't be killed, you believe abortion is murder, you don't even have to hold Christian beliefs. You can believe that that is life, that if uninterrupted would continue to grow into you and I. And it's the interruption that is the action. And what is that interruption? The interruption of life, becoming life. There's already life. Is going to become a human. It is a human. It's already in there. It's done. Sorry, guys. And if you interrupt that, becoming a 30, 50-year-old man, woman, grandma, grandpa, father, mother, child, son, daughter, sister, brother, if you interrupt that, I don't believe that's right. You don't have to be a Bible-thumping Mormon to hold that belief system. And having that belief system has literally nothing to do with your tendency towards violence. And should have nothing to do with them being able to surveil you or your family as a result. And the next one's even worse. LGBTQIA+. And the only reason I know that is because it's in front of me. So if you believe that trans men shouldn't be in women's bathrooms, if you believe trans men shouldn't be playing sports against women, if you believe they shouldn't be boxing against each other or boxing against women in the Olympics, if you believe that your children shouldn't have their dick cut off and castrated in the name of social righteousness, now you can be a domestic violent extremist. There's your list. Now you know the keywords. Now you know what they're looking for. So if you hold any of those belief systems, this can be used to target against you. And it not even be used to target against you. This can be used as justification now. They're telling you who their enemies are. And they're telling you that now we can do this, right? If you believe this, we think you're going to this, so we can this. That's what they're saying. So if you believe immigration is bad for our country, if you believe a child that has not been born yet is still life and shouldn't be ended, if you believe children shouldn't be castrated through chemical solutions that were used on pedophiles because they're mentally unwell or have autism, oh, well then you're a violent extremist. And even if you're not, we can act like you are, and now we can surveil you using the Patriot Act. And there's a whole other host of things that the Patriot Act allows them to do, by the way. Detainment without cause. For evidence they don't have to show you because it's classified. So many things the Patriot Act allows them to do that now they can justify doing if they label you as the potential of a domestic violent extremist. By the way, I would never kill myself. I would never do it. I love my life. I love everything about my life. Never any tendencies towards anything like that. Ever. I would never do it. Absolutely never. Anyways, it says, as the election approaches, we expect foreign malign influence actors to increase their overt and covert use of media outlets, networks, or of inauthentic social media accounts, and agents of influence to launder and spread their preferred narratives and further their election-related goals. Okay? So they're saying, they're going to hijack the media, right? Okay. We are beginning to see Russia target specific voter demographics, promote divisive narratives, and denigrate specific politicians. I don't think that Russia needs to denigrate Kamala Harris. She kind of does that to herself. Iran, the PRC, People's Republic of China, and Russia have also increasingly used generative AI to create more believable text, inauthentic synthetic audio, and video that may enhance their ability to reach U.S. audiences while hiding their origins. I found that to be interesting. And then the intelligence community is confident that Iranian actors have, through social engineering and other efforts, sought access to individuals with direct access to the presidential campaigns of both political parties. Okay. Border immigration. This talks about the threat of immigration. Immediately after saying that, if you think that immigration is a problem, you're the threat. But the next page is, here's how many terrorists have come over the border. After we said that if you believe terrorists coming over the border is bad, you're bad. That's interesting. Quite the hypocrisy. It says we are also encountering individuals in the terrorist screening data set known as the terrorist watch list. TCOs similarly exploit this complex environment to smuggle deadly drugs across our borders. Okay, so they're smuggling drugs, they're getting over our border, they're terrorists. It says that through July fiscal year of 2024, approximately 139 watch list individuals have been encountered at the U.S.-Mexico border, most of whom attempted to illegally enter the United States. And that's such a small figure comparative to what the figure actually is. It also says that 216 during the U.S. or the Canada border. Let's see what else we got here. Human trafficking, they talk about, critical infrastructure, security. Those are the main ones that I wanted to discuss. Here's another part about AI. It says that the PRC used AI to generate and spread disinformation in English and other languages, as well as fake images to allege the devastating fires in Hawaii were caused by the United States testing a weather weapon. I think I mentioned that one already, but very interesting. There's some other stuff here that you should look into. Go check out this document. I promise you it's worth the time, worth the effort. I do have this annotated version for you highlighting the topics that I just discussed that I found to be the most concerning after reading through it last night. But that is what I have for you today. Make sure that, go vote. Go vote. No matter how tiring this election cycle has been, go vote. Make your vote count, especially if you're in a swing state. Elon Musk is now giving away $1 million a day to people who register for this petition. I think that that's a weird one, especially given the fact that they're trying to find people who should be on these lists, and now you're literally putting yourself on a list, right? So I don't know if I would do that if I was you. I'm not saying don't sign the petition if you want to, but also be aware that you're putting your name, phone number, email on a list of people who love the freedom of speech and the Second Amendment. And where's that list going, and who's protecting it, and is it worth $47 to do that? I don't know. But it seems like your protection and privacy might be worth more than $47 or the potential to win $1 million when the Department of Homeland Security is now calling you a threat if you believe in the freedom of speech, if you believe that immigrants shouldn't go over the border, if you believe that, right, any of the above, right? If you can fit you into a box, they will use that box to allow them to weaponize all of their tactics against you. So maybe it's not worth that $47. That's all I'm saying. Okay. All right. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you from the bottom of my heart. Subscribe, leave a 5-star review. Check out my website, roninbasics.com, RONINBASICS, roninbasics.com. You can find us on Amazon as well. Get yourself a phone sleeve, protect your privacy, protect your rights. Don't let the Homeland Security listen into all of your conversations. I love you. I appreciate you. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.
Adams Archive.